Again. Tickly under there. Well, I'm not doing very well here, am I, ladies and gentlemen? 2-0. Welcome everybody to the tournament gallery. My name is Andrew, and this is my colleague Danny. What we've just shown you is a typical combat from the mid to late 15th century using this weapon. Now, this is known as a two-handed sword, and it's called that because it's used with two hands. However, it needs to be light enough and balanced enough that you can use it with just one hand as well as with two. Now, obviously, this sword is designed for hacking and slashing, but it can also be used for thrusting as well. But it becomes quite apparent that you have already worked this out. However, it can be used very differently. Now, those more observant of you may have noticed in the combat earlier, time and time again, Danny and I were placing our hand on the blade itself. Remarkably silly thing to do, so don't do it. And I know what you're thinking, why haven't you cut your hand? Two schools of thought. Firstly, if I grip the blade, sharp or not, and do not allow it to move or slide in my hand, it shouldn't cut me. It doesn't cut you. For example, if you're eating a steak in a restaurant, you take a sharp steak knife and you press into that meat, it doesn't cut it at all. It's not until you start a forwards and backwards, a cutting motion, that it cuts through the meat itself. And the palm is exactly the same. The other school of thought is that these, or the originals at least, were not sharp all the way down the entire length of the blade. Because if I was cruel enough to stab Danny that far, he's dead. If I continue to stab him, he does not become deader. So there's little point in the entire thing being sharp. Mainly, aggressively, just the top third is used. Therefore, if that section's sharp, the rest can remain blunt to allow you to place your hand upon it. So if I can put my hand on the blade, I can do lots of exciting things. For example, if you wouldn't mind, Danny, please cutting me straight down the middle. So by placing a hand on the blade, extra insurance, it acts almost like a shock absorber for that half of the blade, which might come through if I didn't have it on there. Notice, however, I have my fingers open. I have not wrapped them around the blade, because the reality is you wouldn't stop an attack, you would redirect it. And if I have my fingers wrapped around there, it's going to be chipolatas all over the floor. So, hand open. Now the other thing I can do when the hand is open, now I can throw that aside, and now I've got what's known as a half swording technique. That's one hand on the handle, one hand halfway up the blade. So I've turned this rather long weapon into a short, almost bayonet style weapon, where I can manipulate the vulnerable parts of Danny. Now as you look at him, that's every part, because he isn't wearing any armour. However, if he was wearing armour, then using this half swording technique, I can thrust into the visor. That's of course a slot so he can see out. If there's a way out, there's a way in. Also, just behind the neck, there's also, when in full plate armour, a gap. So I can thrust in there. I can also thrust into his armpit, redirect it, send it through the lungs, the kidneys, and then up through between. Sorry, I'm getting a bit carried away. But you get the idea. Half swording's good. Now if I can put one hand on the blade, surely I can put two on. Again, please, Danny. So if I throw it off, grab it with both hands, now I'm going to use a cross designed to protect my hand like an axe, to deliver what's known as a Mordschlag, which translates as murder strike, bang! And with or without a helmet, I would suggest it would cause Danny a certain degree of disorientation. Even if he was good enough to defend himself from that, now I can use the cross differently. I can use it like a hook, pull his sword down, and the pommel straight into his face. This, the pommel, the counterweight to the blade, is where we get the phrase to give something a good pommeling from. Don't worry, we're friends really. So, the two-handed sword, used very differently than you might expect. But how do we know how it was used? Well, we've looked at some manuscripts, many of them. One illustration can be seen from around this here. Now, the manuscript these illustrations have come from is known as Fettbuch, and it was written by Hans Talhofer. So Fettbuch simply translates as fight book, and not a great deal is known about the fight master himself, Hans Talhofer. We know he was German, one of the leading fight masters of the period, and he was employed by aristocracy, nobility, the very wealthy, to teach them how to use various weapons that were typical of the 15th century, including this, the two-handed sword. There's a problem with this manuscript. As beautiful and as brightly coloured as these illustrations are, they can be rather confusing. They can be difficult to decipher because so much information is missing. You're presented with the colourful image, but then there is a small patch of text written on each of these illustrations here, trying to explain what's going on. It's written in Swabian, but having it translated, it causes even more confusion. Allow me to explain using my favourite illustration, this one here. Now you can see there's a man in red and a man in blue. The man in red seems to have got behind the man in blue, seems to have seized hold of his blade, and seems to be kicking him in the small of the back. Now the image is fairly self-explanatory. However, when I look at that small patch of text, it gets rather confusing. So you've all seen the picture. The text translates as, having seized the blade, slip in. That's it. I mean, it doesn't give you a lot to go on, really. And clearly you can't get into that position in just one single move. So now's where we have a closer look by working backwards. So if I could borrow you again, Danny, please could you remove my head from this side? So, step in and I grab the blade having defended myself. That's the first part of the illustration done. Now it says, having seized the blade, slip in. So it wants me to move in towards Danny, not run away. So if I do that, and at the same time I shove the cross and the hilt into his face, it turns his head. I now step across, puts me behind him. From here, if I now kick him in the small of the back, his head goes really backwards, and from here a simple soaring action, like while removing his head from the dongle together. Now perhaps that's what Hans Talhofer means by this illustration. To be quite honest, unless we get in a time machine, travel back and ask Hans, we'll never really know. But that makes some sense, because we're moving in exactly the same way. We still have 2 arms, 2 legs and bifocal eyes. We still have the same body mechanics. So we're not moving any differently. It's just trying to work out exactly how they're moving, and we can't be 100% certain. However, these illustrations here are over very quickly. One move and it's finished. And if we showed you that, I'd imagine you'd feel rather shortchanged. So instead, we have pieced together a number of different techniques into a routine so that we can better highlight them to you, the visitor, which we will do by breaking down a section of combat we started with. So, to begin with, before we actually start fighting, we adopt a starting position, a stance. Now there are a number of them in the manuscript, some in the high line, some in the low line, some are very aggressive and some are very defensive. Now I'm going to adopt one in the low line. This one here is known as the Armoury, which simply translates as Fool's Guard, because the point's facing towards the ground.
So if my compatriot over here is going to adopt a guard in the low line, I'm going to do the opposite. So this is called the curlier, or the crown guard.
Now you're probably wondering, why if we approach each other about to fight with the points of the swords facing anywhere but at one another? Well, the simple answer is we're willing the other to make the first attack. The problem occurs from this position if we attack simultaneously. So he kebabs, a shish kebab, and I get split straight down the middle. So we don't attack simultaneously, we wait for one or the other to make the first attack. Whoever it is, however, needs to work around the edges, not run straight towards their opponent. Otherwise, they're dead.
Okay, so as Andrew said, I am going to be working with what we call traversing defences and attacks. The first thing I'm going to do, keep out of distance of that point. I'm going to try and work round and hack his leg off.
So I move first rule self-defense, then I defend myself, keep the momentum in the sword blade all the way around to remove his leg.
Reverse, traverse, okay, so actually the movement is the defence, using that blade to glance his sword out of the way, continue that motion and chop him down through the head.
A sloping parry here, encouraging my opponent's blade to the ground, keep the circular footwork and move the head.
Okay, so stepping back, can you see what I mean? I'm moving in a circular fashion rather than a linear fashion. Now I'm blocking with the fourth or strong part of the blade. I'm literally going to drive it out of the way, expose the stomach and slice him right down there.
Jumping back, protecting the very tall six-pack there.
Yeah.
Now having done that half-swording technique, shove it in his eye.
So step back, this time just a fencing retreat, okay, using the blade to glance his out of the way.
But he's on the run, keep the attacks coming, flip over, try the other one.
And another retreat! Now I can show you something slightly more fancy. So this is what we call a glissade, which literally translates from the French to glide. So I'm going to glide the blade out of the way. That takes my point right on target, shortest distance, and thrust it right in the stomach.
Ah! Six-pack! Jump away, beat it off, cut down for the head.
So stepping through, hanging parry, looking through that mirror, continuing the motion, try and take his head off my numbers.
Now I could grab the blade and step in like I showed you in that illustration. Or, as I showed you at the very beginning, I can grab the blade, use my cross to beat the hilt out of his hand.
I really like that. There is no way that I can hang on to that blade just down to physics and levers really. It's a nice move.
Thank you, so you get the idea. What we should do now is show you the combat once again at full pace. However, as it's 2-0 to me,
Right, yeah.
just reminding you, what we'll do is, we'll start the section exactly the same stances. Somewhere in the middle of each section though, each of us has to make a change of direction once.
Each of us makes a change of direction.
If
This could be interesting. Okay.
If you went left,
Yeah.
go right.
Simple as that.
Yeah, and then we'll end up in a different position.
Cheers for that.
Happy?
Well, we'll find out.
Best of luck. So then,
Okay, I'll go this way. Ah, not that time, son, not that time. 1, 2, 1, he's coming back. Now I'm moving up. Let's let it get this straight. Same thing again. Change of direction once.
yeah. Sure we haven't done this before?
I'm all right. Hang on a minute. I'm not leaving it there. I want to roll now. Who wants to see a deciding bout, yes? Yeah! I'm not leaving it there, Andrew. I'm sorry.
Alright, if you want to see a deciding bout, I shall leave the next decision up to you. Would you like to see the loser of this final bout lose in a very gentlemanly, honourable, chivalric fashion typical of the gentlemen of the period? Or would you like to see them totally crushed and deeply humiliated? Wait, we'll have a show of hands. Who's losing in a very chivalric, honourable and gentlemanly manner? And who's for deeply humiliated?
Honestly, now this is exactly the problem when you make museums free entry. You end up with a mob, rabble.
That aside, I'm going to adopt a brand new position for you.
Okay.
Now, I know you're a fan of those in the high line, so I'm going to adopt one, the highest of the high. Are you ready?
Yeah.
Full dash!
Okay.
Off the roof.
Hidden guard.
You ready?
Is that humiliating enough for you, ladies and gentlemen? Yes? There you are!
Thank you so much, everybody. We really hope that gave you a greater insight into how the two-handed sword is used. We'll be hanging around if you've any questions or you'd like to hold